First off, we've grown to almost 50 subs in a week since I launched this channel. I want to thank every viewer who's been kind enough to click that sub button. On a channel as small as mine, each and every sub makes a big difference, and you've all been so very kind to do so. Thank you. With that being said, here's my rundown of what I've been using and why I rank them in this order, starting with the Razer Orochi V2. The Orochi V2 is Razer's most recent take on a wireless fingertip mouse. The egg shape is very similar to the G305, but with some ergonomic considerations designed to improve comfort, grip and usability. The switches are proprietary KL 4.0, feel snappy, responsive, and despite no split shell, the buttons do rebound very nicely with well implemented side buttons. The mouse takes either a single AA or AAA battery and weighs between 65 to 72 grams dependent upon the size used. The sensor position is more far forward than typically seen in most other mice, so if you're a wrist aimer you might find that this takes some adjustment time, as it did for myself. Razer also offer custom top shells at a small fee to get a mouse that's perfect for your setup, allowing a lot of user flexibility. There's no typical Razer RGB on this mouse, which I really welcome, although you will need to install Synapse if you want to modify the poll rate or edit the DPI outside of the presets built into the mouse. It's worth noting that whilst this is designed to be a gamer first mouse, the inclusion of Bluetooth connectivity does make this mouse absolutely viable for productivity, where you'll sacrifice polling rate for hundreds of hours of battery life and get somewhere near the 900 or so quoted on the side of the box. I picked this mouse up because I thought it was a really interesting addition to the wireless fingertip market, and to be frank, there isn't a large amount of choice available at the moment in that space. It's priced at a mid to high end $70 US, which I think is pretty reasonable for the mouse you're getting, but potentially some extra skates, grip tape or alternative shell would have helped to justify that price. Now, using a AAA lithium, you can get it to 65 grams stock, as I said, which is totally acceptable, but I wanted to see just how far I could push it without altering the shell base or functionality, and managed to get it down to around 50 grams, so about 15G off of the lightest stock option, and did so by cutting a lot of the internal skeleton of the mouse away with a Dremel, drilling holes under the label at the bottom and reattaching. And I also swapped the existing AA and AAA battery bracket for an LR44 battery adapter, getting around 15 hours of usage between battery cells, but you can get 40 for around $10, so I didn't mind changing them out too much. The Orochi lands at number 5 because I personally don't like how high the buttons are off the mat. The shape isn't the most comfortable for me, and the coating feels a little less premium than I've seen in some of the other mice on this list, or even other Razer products like the Viper Mini or Ultimate. The Ztrfy MZ1 is a collaboration mouse designed in partnership with Zai, Rocket Jump Ninja Rakoa and Ztrfy. Zai is a strong proponent of the adage, shape is king, and the MZ1 puts that theory to the test with one of the most unusual and unique shapes in recent memory. The mouse has a premium build with a host of customizable features including debounce, lift-off distance and RGB, all controlled by a switch in the base and button combinations with no proprietary software available. First thing I noticed picking it up was just how different this mouse would be to use. A safe shape like the G Pro X Superlight asks you how you want to grip it. The MZ1 instead demands that you hold it as the designer intended it to be held. I think if you do this and put some time in, it's a really effective mouse for precision aiming. There's attention to detail too, like the circular shell cutouts stopping where you'd be expected to place your fingers, and the asymmetric extended right side making gripping it more comfortable. The deep comfort grooves and soft curves make this feel like a mouse designed to fit the human hand first and appeal to gamers second. It's almost the difference between a DX racer or gamer bucket seat and an ergonomic premium office chair, something like a Herman Miller or Human Scale Freedom. The clicks are KLGM 8.0s, tactile and incredibly responsive. They are legitimately some of the best clicks I've ever felt in a stock product, and the PixArt 3389 is a proven top tier optical sensor, so no issues there. The stock cable is about as good as you can expect from a stock cable, and I would have had no issues whatsoever using it had I not opted to swap it out. The scroll wheel and side buttons are less pronounced, but I was able to adapt to both very, very quickly and had no issues hitting them. It is on the higher end of price for a wired product at $80, but I feel like you're getting a unique shape experience and something that's very well put together for that premium price. So it works for me, but ultimately I appreciate that it won't work for everyone. The mouse weighs in around 60 grams, so it's not the lightest wireless mouse at that size, and the translucent shell and RGB is a divisive look that I, quite obviously as you can see, didn't personally enjoy. That's where my mods on this mouse were focused, on the aesthetics to create a more muted and monochrome colourway that better fit my desk. The only reason that this mouse doesn't place higher is how much it asks from you to become comfortable with it and how specific the muscle memory and grip is to this mouse. If the shape works for you and you're willing to spend the time to adapt to the grip, then I really do believe that this could be an endgame mouse. But as someone who swaps mice quite frequently, especially when reviewing products, I'm too inconsistent with it to put in the time that I need to be to main the MZ1. The G-Wolf's Hati-S shape is what a Hati-M would be if you kept the height and massively reduced the width and the length. The product has been out for around 2 years, and despite some launch issues with quality control, I'm pleased to confirm that since late 2020 I've purchased 4 of these mice and all have seen significant improvements to build quality and parts used, with no complaints on any of my copies. The Hati-S has been produced in numerous colour options, but the 2 models that jointly occupy my number 3 slot are the wired Ace and the wireless Classic. It ships with a premium storage tin, spare skates, extra switches, cleaning brush, paracord and grip tape. The latest models also now ship with KL 8.0 switches as stock and a PTFE sensor ring skate and upgraded tactile scroll wheel. The Hati-S Ace uses a 3389 sensor, whilst the first batch of wireless use a modified 3335. The 3335 variant also ships with a large USB receiver, which some people have criticised. Personally, not an issue as I don't have it on display, so it's a non-factor, but if you do want to keep a clean aesthetic, this might be another limiting factor that stops it being an appropriate mouse for you. G-Wolves price these mice as around $80 for the wired and between $100 to $110 for the wireless, so these aren't budget mice, but you get a premium product, you get a lot of extras included in the box, and I don't have any issue with the price points that they've landed at. There's also included software for both, with the Ace offering some additional features not seen in the wireless, like debounce time and lift-off distance due to the 3389 sensor. The shape feels somewhat of a hybrid between the Finalmouse Ultralight 2 or Starlight 12 Small and Razer Viper Mini, but I find it more comfortable than either of the two due to the wide rear curve giving me an easy position to anchor to and micro adjust from, and the subtle comfort grooves on mouse 1 and 2 keep my fingers in place without being restrictive around where and how I choose to grip. The stock weights are impressive at 48 grams for the Ace and 60 grams for the wireless Classic, putting them in the running as some of the lightest mice in their respective categories. One of the wireless mouse you can see has been significantly modified to reduce the weight, which now stands at 48 grams with no permanent changes. This was achieved by first swapping the stock battery and its retainer for a smaller capacity 100 mAh, saving approximately 8 grams alone. This does take the battery life down to around 15 to 20 hours, which was a compromise that I personally was willing to make for that much weight saving. I then further reduced the weight by unclipping the back shell, as I play exclusively fingertip and don't make contact with my palm on this part of the mouse. There's also a fun quirk in that Hati-S top shells are completely interchangeable across all models, so if there's a particular colorway that you like that isn't available on your new wireless model, you can easily unclip it and swap them over without needing to make any modifications to your mouse. Until very recently, the Hati-S was my number 1 mouse, but the next 2 recent releases have very narrowly managed to dethrone it. Finalmouse have produced one of the lightest wireless mice ever made with the Starlight 12, delivering the first ever magnesium mouse that manages to be 10 grams lighter than their previous wired flagship, the Ultralight 2 Cape Town. We'll be keeping it high level here, but if you want my full thoughts on the mouse, check out my in-depth review linked below. The build quality has been questionable in a limited number of copies, but I've addressed this in more detail in the review that I mentioned. Putting these factors aside for a moment, what you're left with is a durable, high-performing wireless mouse that lasts 10 to 14 days between charges and weighs in at less than 45 grams. Button tactility is quite firm with the stock Omron 20Ms, but this will really be down to taste. I swapped mine for TTC Gold V2 30mm for a lighter and easier click to spam. Other people have really enjoyed the intentionality and force required to actuate the stock switches, so your mileage may vary here. The Starlight 12 doesn't innovate on the Ultralight 2 shape, at least in the small variant here on this list, but as someone who used the Ultralight 2 quite consistently, having a wireless variant that's 10 grams lighter has finally retired my Cape Towns. Finalmouse remains a divisive brand, and this release hasn't done anything to change that. I think regardless of the drop chaos, shipping delays and documented quality control issues, I could easily see myself putting this mouse as my number one, if it wasn't for a little husky that I just can't seem to put down. The G-Wolves HSK was a bit of a wild card purchase for me. I wasn't fortunate enough to be included in the initial sample group that was sent the red shell prototype back in late 2020, and when 50 units dropped in batch 1 exclusively from X-Ray Pad, I didn't want to miss out as I knew stock wouldn't last long. The HSK is being restocked with new exciting colour options and translucent shells and should be available around the time of this list being published. The stock Omron 20mm clicks were easy to spam and had great feedback. I changed them for TTC Gold V2s for consistency across my main mice, but I would have had absolutely no problem using the stock switches, which were tactile and responsive. The HSK uses a 3389 sensor, and whilst there's no software, lift-off distance, DPI and polling rate can all be adjusted on the mouse using button combinations. The sensor position was a little more rear biased than I was used to when compared to other mice, but I was able to adjust my grip a few millimeters back to compensate and was quickly choking just as many headshots on this as I do on all my other mice. The HSK is also the lightest mouse I own at 34 grams on my scales. It's rare to find something that makes the Starlight 12 feel heavy, but the HSK manages it. The mouse felt so immediately natural, almost an extension of my hand with very little weight or shell to maneuver around. Whilst the mouse is short at 82mm long, it retains the button and grip width of a much more standard mouse at 60mm wide, making it accessible and comfortable for me with larger hands. Priced at $80, this is an expensive price point for a niche wired mouse. Whilst I wouldn't suggest that what you're getting is competitively priced against, say, the Orochi V2 when looking at features on a page, I don't think that's what this mouse is trying to go for. This mouse aims, pardon the pun, to be a precision tool for fingertip players to perform at their best, and on that note, I got $80 worth of value from it myself. In terms of why this mouse occupies my number one spot, I'm finding it really challenging to point to one specific feature or reason. It could be how very light it is, or how the shape perfectly complements my natural hand position when gripping, or how wide the micro adjustment range is, or the click responsiveness. In all honesty, I think I'm struggling to find a single reason why this mouse tops my list because, well, there isn't one. It just feels right, and sometimes that intangible feeling in itself is the most important factor of all when choosing your next mouse.